Oi, pessoal, boa tarde. Tudo bem? Conseguem me ouvir? Estou esperando a câmera me posicionar aqui. Olá. Acho que ficou melhor. Então, pessoal, boa tarde. A gente vai começar aqui fazendo a apresentação, né, do professor Jonathan Gray. E esse evento vai ser transmitido ao vivo, mas em língua inglesa, tá? Então, a gente vai só fazer essa boas-vindas em português e a gente vai seguir em inglês, tá? So, thank you very much, Jonathan, for having you here. Today is a very special day for us here at School of Communication and Arts at the University of São Paulo. We have a full auditorium here to listen to your talk. Actually, your book talk, The Public Data Cultures. So the SMU Research Group and the Department of Journalism and Publishing at the School of Communication Arts of the University of São Paulo are welcoming Jonathan Gray from King's College London for a discussion on his brand new book, just released by Polity Publishing this past month. This book talk brings together researchers, students, and practitioners interested in how data shapes public life. And in his book, Public Data Cultures, Jonathan Gray examines the social, political, and cultural formations that emerge around data infrastructure, exploring how publics engage with, context, and reimagine data in contemporary society. So this session offers an opportunity to discuss the book's key concepts, reflect on current debates, in digital methods and data politics, and connect these ideas to ongoing research here at this department. So I would like to thank the people that are following us also on YouTube transmission, and people here can make some questions after his presentation. So just let me know if you want to ask something. You can come here and use the microphone and talk with him directly, okay? So Jonathan, thank you very much for your presence today. And I would like to let you now speak and talk a little bit about what you prepare for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to join you. I would love to see the room if it's possible to, at some point later, take a picture or turn the camera around. It'll be nice to see everyone. But thank you so much to Alan and to everyone involved for organizing this exchange. So I'm going to share a little bit about public data cultures. The book has grown over 15 years, so it started in 2010, during which time, oh, hello, hi everyone, it's nice to see you, hey, that's nice to, get a sense of the room. As you know, a lot has changed over the last 15 years, right? So I changed, the world has changed, we've all changed. So the book kind of got longer, and it got much longer, and then it got shorter, and then it got much shorter. I just wanted to mention this because, we often talk about the end result of a book. We don't always talk about the process of writing and revising and changing and growing and shrinking of a book. Of what to say and what space to leave, right? So I found it really helpful to talk to people about this process. So if any of you are writing books and want to talk about the process, I'm always very happy to do that. It's really nice to see the book out in the world and having a life of its own. It's funny, one of the things that I noticed when reviews, quotes and reviews were coming back and when people were reading it, was that it's presented as a hopeful book, which was interesting to me. It's funny, you have these things reflected back to you when a book is being read. But I wanted to situate this a little bit, like what kind of hope the book has. I guess, to contextualize this hope, I wanted to start with the work of Grace Lee Boggs, which confronts the many failures of American society. And as Danny Glover puts it in the foreword to the book, we exist in a failed paradigm, and how do we come out of the ashes of these failures? In many areas of life, things are not working, right? There are many different kinds of intersecting injustices and oppressions, and I'm sure I don't need to convince you of this. From climate catastrophe to biodiversity to collapse to inequality to surging kind of right-wing extremism, war, genocide, destruction, and what is sometimes called polycrisis, right? And I also likely don't need to persuade you of how digital technologies are extracting and exploiting and polluting and surveilling and oppressing and bordering and destroying in many ways. So Grace Lee Boggs is taking this as a starting point, and so Grace Lee Boggs is an activist, a writer in the US in the mid-20th century, I guess. But I really like this way that she frames her work as rebuilding and redefining and respiriting, whether through growing food in abandoned lots or community education or cooperatives. So part of the way that the book is hopeful is thinking about what it means to come out of ashes and to come out of difficult situations. Not that the difficult situations are ending, but what it means to find hope amidst failure and ashes and difficult situations, and about how we might rework things and respirit things and recompose the arrangements that we live with. So it also is looking at how we might draw inspiration and hope from intersectional feminism, from decolonial and indigenous thought and practice, thinking about dismantling oppressive systems and remaking social relations and activating worlds of many worlds. And I guess the starting point for the book is how data might be configured to play a role in supporting relations which are regenerative and redistributive and pluriversal, or supporting a world in which there are many worlds. So the purpose of the book is to nurture critical and creative engagements with data, whether in the context of research, reporting, activism, art, organizing, or everyday life. So I thought today, just to kind of share the book, I could give a little walkthrough with some readings so you have a sense of what the book is about. So I'll start with a short reading from the introduction. You press play on the video. It shows a figure moving his hands across an illuminated screen of bright bubbles. He paces back and forth between an animated projection and a podium from which he configures the display. The bubbles are countries, and their trajectories indicate statistical trends over many centuries. As they move, the man speaks of wars and revolutions, economic booms and epidemics, carbon emissions, and everyday life. This is public data culture, shared practices and arrangements for making meaning, inviting engagement, and orienting action with data that is often freely available, digital, and related to matters of shared concern. So this scene is one manifestation of public data culture. There are many others: collaborative spreadsheets reporting harassment, viral global warming graphics, apps for counting butterflies, decolonial countermaps, artworks using data to display censorship. Public data shapes how we know and how we live together. So the word data comes from the Latin datum, which means given, but data should not be taken for granted. This book advocates for critical engagement with the practices and arrangements through which data becomes public, and it supports reimagining and recomposing public data beyond dominant modes of display. So a lot has been written about public data in the sense of examining the creation of numbers, statistics, and data sets. So for centuries, there have been different understandings of joblessness, or what it means not to have a job. But making unemployment into a number requires widespread mobilizations and significant institutional work. So the same is true of numbering growth, greenhouse gases, and gender inequalities. Each of these numbers has its own infrastructures and histories, and these numbers reflect different ideas about what matters, how things can be measured, and how data can shape action. So not taking these numbers for granted means unflattening them and examining how they are made, whether through ethnographies or through archives. So that's making data. There are also different ways of making data public. So making something public involves material arrangements for organizing relations. So as with mixtapes or film festivals, public data cultures unfold through social and technical arrangements of making and sharing, arrangements which require work, creativity, and care. So histories of public data are entangled with histories of bureaucracy, empire, propaganda, computing, policy, design, journalism, and activism. And ways of making data public have shifted from printed leaflets, atlases, and exhibitions to software, servers, and screens. So not taking these arrangements for granted means unfolding them, attending to who and what is involved in making meaning, inviting engagement, and orienting action with data. So the phrase public data is widely used to describe data which is in principle available to everyone, whether governmental data through transparency initiatives, data from media outlets or non-profit organizations, or company data published through disclosure requirements, or research data or scientific data which is shared to comply with funding rules. So the book examines the publicness of data, not just as a category or an aspiration, something to be hoped for, but as the accomplishment of interwoven social and technological processes which are worthy of empirical investigation and conceptual reappraisal. So it examines how public data cultures are reorganized online amidst the rise of the social web, apps, platforms, big tech, and AI, and how they might be critically reworked or recomposed. So there is this long-standing notion that I'm sure you know from hacker culture that information wants to be free. And this is often envisaged in terms of removing barriers and obstacles, of liberating information from systems. Public data is often negatively characterized in terms of what must be absent for it to be made available, rather than what must be present for it to make a difference. So prominent examples of this negative conception of making data public can be found in the form of open data initiatives. So, as I'm sure you may know, in the early 2000s, activists and technologists and scientists argued that certain kinds of data should be made available for everyone to use by removing legal and technical restrictions, drawing inspiration from free software, open access to research, and transparency campaigns. They begin to talk of open data in relation to data sets published by governments and scientists, and advocates said that data can be considered open if it is not subject to legal or technical restrictions. So this idea goes mainstream. It's taken up by the UN, the World Bank, the G20, the OECD, and many governments around the world promote open data through dedicated portals and promises. And the idea is that open data is data that's made available that means, in a way that means it can be freely reused and redistributed by anyone, anywhere, anytime. And advocates call for liberating or unlocking this material for those outside government to reuse. So there are very different ideas about why this matters. Some focus on economic growth, some focus on democracy or justice or participation. And despite these different visions and values, there is agreement around the conventions for removing obstacles to reuse. So these are often intentionally very open-ended about how open data is used. And this intentional open-endedness could be called data liberalization, and critics have suggested that it can end up empowering the already powerful, supporting austerity, supporting marketization or auditorial citizenship or subsidies for big technology companies, as I guess we see now with concerns around material that's publicly available on the web being used for AI training, for example. So this focus on what must be absent for data to flow freely should not distract us from what must be present for it to become public in meaningful ways. So the book is kind of also asking, how might we understand making data public, not just in terms of removing restraints, but also in terms of gathering and activating collectives, cultivating capacities, investing in infrastructures, and caring for arrangements that enable data to make a difference. So data is more than a resource to be unlocked or liberalized, and the book aims to unflatten what is involved in making data public beyond removing restrictions, and explores practices and arrangements for making data public in the age of the internet. So the first section of the book invites reconsideration of public data cultures. So to reconsider is to look again, to be receptive, to pay close attention to what might be unexpected or overlooked. And reconsideration can involve unsimplifying and holding many things in mind at once, accommodating tension and trouble, and piecing together a more expansive picture. And I really like the way that feminist scholar Donna Haraway writes of troubling as learning to be truly present. So it's kind of this attentiveness. In reconsidering public data, we find it is more than unrestricted bundles of facts which point to things or circumstances. It is more than a resource for pointing to things, for designating things. And the chapters in this section add layers to thicken how we think about what is involved in making data public. And the second section explores different ways of critically engaging data. So data can be critically practiced as well as critically studied. And this section provides inspiration and starting points for those interested in doing data differently. So the book is intended to feed imagination around public data cultures and how they may be recomposed. So rather than starting from scratch, it asks how might already existing arrangements be critically disassembled and creatively recomposed with regenerative sensibilities. And the chapters of the book look beyond liberalizing data or just removing restrictions towards public data cultures which can be more inventive and purposeful and attuned to the situations in which data is used. So the book, it's a gathering of notes on data projects and practices, and it's written with the spirit of Mindy Su, who did this wonderful cyber feminism index. She reads Ursula Le Guin, who maybe you know is the kind of science fiction and fantasy writer, who makes this contrast between looking around with hunting, so looking around widely, gathering as looking around, and hunting as looking ahead. So the book is very much inspired by this idea of gathering as looking widely around instead of just hunting as looking ahead. In this sense, it's less of a promise. It's not a program. Its chapters contain materials to think with, which are intended to warm how we think, to add layers to how we practice and use more of the available range. So yeah, that's the overview of the book. I'll read a little bit from the first chapter. Scrolling through the feed, there are hundreds of pastel-colored drawings with handwritten captions. Small pictures of people, creatures, and objects are organized into graphs and overlaid with numbers and captions. Queues of people spreading over many images represent millions of Palestinians displaced homes. Boxes of Amazon crates highlight discrepancies between corporate profits and taxes paid. Hands in handcuffs contrast arrests of white supremacists, and Black Lives Matter protesters. Rainbows represent the size of donations to homophobic politicians from companies that celebrate pride. This is the Instagram account of data journalist Mona Chalabi, who works creatively with data as cultural material to display inequalities, contextualize current events, and probe patterns of everyday life. Her pieces aim to make data meaningful, relatable, and engaging in ways that don't require advanced statistical knowledge or computational expertise. Mona's work shows how data does more than designate things, more than just refer to things. Data can be viewed as collections of elements whose arrangements become meaningful in different ways. So just as researchers look at language or numbers and models in more than instrumental terms, more than just in terms of how they're used, we can take a more expansive look at what data does, how it makes things intelligible, and how it materially organizes, schematizes, articulates, and shapes phenomena. So public data projects translate the shapes of data sets, rows and columns, and so on, into charts, colors, or sounds, often drawing on the conventions of non-digital or pre-digital formats. They assemble material and media into hybrid compositions for counting, calculating, interpreting, showing, telling, listening, and witnessing. So to feed reconsideration of how we know, experience, and live with data as cultural material, the following sections explore different ways of making data meaningful through arrangement, whether through lists or tables or relational databases, visualizations, sketching, sculpture, and sonification. So as an example, we probably all make lists. So as well as being an everyday data practice, listing can be something that shows what collective arrangements do and don't care about. Listing can be a kind of infrastructure, but also a form of intervention or activism. And there are sections on spreadsheeting as networked issue articulation, on data as sculpture, on data as sound. So the chapter aims to look beyond bureaucracy and beyond commercial ordering to consider how data can serve as a medium of collective attunement or noticing. So the next chapter looks at data as a medium of participation and explores how data serves to enable people to take part, whether through official political processes, journalistic investigations, activism, or environmental citizenship. And participation derives from the word participare, which means to take part or to give part in, to share in, or to be part of. And this implies being with and being in a relation, being part of something with others. So participation can include and exclude. It can bring things into the foreground and bring things into the background. And data can be used to give shape to the past in the present in order to unfold the future in different ways. So it invites and inclines different forms of action. And public data projects embed models of the world through their interfaces and infrastructures. So, for example, there's this Adopt a Hydrant project, which is valued as its potential for like a model for adopting all kinds of different things. I don't know if you've seen this project before, but basically it was, there's lots of projects like it, but this one was to support volunteers to shovel out hydrants. When it snows, you have hydrants, fire hydrants, which are used to put out fires. So volunteers would come and clear the snow around these hydrants so they could be used by people trying to put out fires. But this model was used for software, inviting people to adopt many kinds of things, from trees to sidewalks to trash cans and bus shelters. So as well as directly using the software, some people were inspired by the interface features, including this one, where the hydrants or the fire hydrants were turned into friendly characters, asking not to be abandoned. So this is Sparky the hydrant, who says, "I've been adopted by this person who are taking care of me for the winter. There are many other hydrants that need to be adopted. Look around and help keep my friends warm. If you can't take care of me anymore, abandon me." And then if the hydrant is abandoned, you receive an automatic message from the app saying you have abandoned your hydrant. Have a warm and safe winter. Sparky will be lonely without you. And then there's a little picture of Sparky with a little wave and a tear coming from its eye. So this is the politics of this are complicated, right? Care, being asked to care can be transformative. It can also be a way of asking already overworked and overburdened citizens to step in to fix issues of limited resources. These kinds of projects can connect you with people and develop care, as well as enmeshing and embedding extractive technologies into everyday life and arrangements of responsibility. They can mask systemic issues, simplify problems, and displace other ways of understanding and responding. So the chapter goes on to look at different kinds of invitations to use data and to make data, from corporate rituals to feminist gatherings to data witnessing. And it looks at things like data portals and how they've evolved over time, for example. It also looks at like different kinds of data sets which were sought on data portals around the world by citizens, but not found. So these are examples of things that citizens wanted but couldn't find on official portals. I also spent time looking at the histories and politics of these kinds of data schemes for articulating features of the Earth's surface in projects such as OpenStreetMap, and tracing the circulation and cultures of devices, including like sensing and data making devices online. So the third chapter looks at transnational coordination, or ways of doing things together across countries. Public data projects can gather cross-border communities of practice, and they can be viewed as multi-layered and sometimes contentious sites of coordination across countries, where different kinds of visions of world-making and collective life and collective action play out. And in tracing these data projects, we can also detect systems of colonization and bureaucracy and the making of markets and outsourcing and offshore finance. And the chapter asks whether data might also help to dismantle such systems and grow other kinds of economic and ecological relations and forms of interdependence. Which brings us on to the second part of the book. I hope it makes sense so far. I can't really, it's hard to kind of see if everyone's following okay, but the second part of the book is about ways of critically engaging with data. So the first chapter in this section is about missing data, so how data becomes missing, and the work that's required to show that data is missing, and also making data in response. So it opens with this wonderful project, which is Mimi Onuoha's Library of Missing Data Sets, which explores patterns of absence in an increasingly machine-readable world. And it looks at how activists and journalists and researchers create their own data in response to what they consider to be absences or things which are missing. So this chapter looks at projects to make data on police violence and police killings, multinational tax avoidance, and also coal power plants. So, you know, there's like different projects on carbon emissions. The third one looks specifically at the type of source, in this case, coal power, as a type of carbon emission. Projects like this require imagination to understand and reverse engineer and develop these arrangements, which are often complex, layered, cross-organizational, and distributed. And the point of this chapter is that they raise questions about what kinds of data should exist, and for what and for whom. So the final chapter is on critical data practices. And I guess these are ways of working which bring critical perspectives about data into practical arrangements with data, which draw inspiration from many places and communities of practice. So in the spirit of cultivating and pluralizing imagination around critical engagements with data, this chapter looks at what can be learned from approaches which have been described as accountable, Black, careful, decolonial, democratic, feminist, indigenous, intersectional, more than human, queer, slow, speculative, warm, weird, and many other things. So it's looking at how to learn from many communities and many kinds of theoretical traditions in thinking what makes data practices critical or creative or different from dominant modes of display and working with data. So, for example, one of the sections looks at how you develop sensibilities for what is left out or abandoned or erased in data systems. And this draws on things like fabric seams or rock formations or road repairs or pottery practices. There's also this notion of speculative data practices. So this project in the top left is a kind of catastrophe market simulation. There's also projects on forging certificates from leaked data from offshore companies to bot networks which synthetically promote climate news. And I'll try and quickly play a clip. I hope this works. So what this is from Tager Brain and Sam Levine. Can you still hear me okay? Yeah. And basically what they did is they created bots which click on ads from climate news in order to artificially inflate the value of climate news. So I'll show you a kind of quick clip. So I think you get the idea, but you could see basically many bots kind of clicking on these advertisements of climate news in order to artificially inflate the value of it. Here's another piece. This is on querying data, and this is from Maya Livio, who's an artist and researcher. And her work is looking at bird data sets, and she's very interested in highlighting the absence of female and intersex birds. And her work explores and also troubles different ways of writing these missing birds back into archives and data sets through making speculative data sets and compositions. So I'll show a little snippet of this work. site of transnational politics. And it invites reimagining the role that data can play beyond polluting data centers, beyond exploited platform workers, beyond extractive technology companies, and surveillance industrial complexes. And it explores how data can be used in ways which are more hopeful, inventive, playful, expressive, redistributive, and regenerative. And it explores how data might cultivate capacities for collective reorientation, both understanding entangled troubles that we live with, as well as other ways that we might live together. Can't wait to hear more about all of your work. And before we go into the discussion, I wanted to mention that I'd really like to connect and keep in touch with many of you. So you can find me online in various places on the left, and on the right you can see links to the book and other details and materials around it. But thank you so much.
Can you hear me, Jonathan? Jonathan, can you hear me? Hi.
Oops.
Hello. Can you hear me?
And yeah, I'd be happy to take questions. Sorry, I should have said that.
Tá funcionando?
Oops, I can't hear you.
Hi, Jonathan, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello. Just a minute. Can you hear me? Hi.
Ei, som. Travou tudo. Ei, som.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Hi. Jonathan. Hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Huh? Jonathan, can you hear me now? Hello. Hi.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Just a minute. We're
Can't hear
checking
you.
here. Okay.
Okay.
Não, tá não ouvindo então. Hã?
Yeah. Nice to see you, but I can't hear you at all.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello, Jonathan, can you hear me? Hi. Ele estava me ouvindo no começo. Peraí. Manda no chat pra ele. Preciso do mouse aí.
Oh, hello? I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
I can.
perfect.
Thanks.
Finally. We were trying to reach you. Now we can.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Jonathan, thank you very much for your presentation. It has made us more clear about your book, your ideas, and we have some people here that want to ask you some questions about what had you commented here today. Do you mind?
No, of course.
Okay.
Thanks.
Is anyone else anyone wants first? Beatriz, ok? Você pode ficar aqui, ó.
Eu acho que não vai virar. Hi.
Hey.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for your talk. I mean, it's a pleasure to hear you today, and I got even more excited about the book. So I have two questions, if it's not a problem for you. First of all, my name is Beatriz. I'm from Smart and User Media, the group research from Professor Alan. And the first one is, where do your research ethics and public data culture intersect? How do you see these two domains informing or even impacting each other?
So, sorry, could I ask, was it how ethics and
Yeah.
data futures?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. I guess, first of all, you can study data ethics, which I think is fascinating, seeing how ethics are codified, how they're shaped, how they're institutionalized, how they're delegated, right? So it's not only through decisions or practices from people, it's also increasingly through bots, through scripts, through procedures. So you can study ethics, data ethics, through software, through systems, through interfaces, through institutional procedures. So in a way, as a science and technology studies researcher, it's fascinating to see the politics of ethics and also what ethics are capable of paying attention to through these kinds of arrangements and what they maybe miss out. I think my own sort of approach to ethics tends to draw on more on feminist approaches to ethics, seeing ethics in terms of relations and good relations, and looking beyond compliance towards things like care. So I think, there's work in the final chapter of the book on what that means in different contexts, not only drawing on kind of feminist work, but also, for example, drawing on indigenous data sovereignty and indigenous approaches to data, where I guess the understanding of responsibility can look quite different to, for example, the kinds of procedures and processes that we're used to. I don't know if that answers your question a bit, but basically I feel like there are many ways of approaching ethics, including the constraints of ethics. There are some promising ways of seeing ethics in terms of relations, which don't just draw on the way that ethics are institutionalized, but also, I guess, feminist and indigenous approaches, for example. And sorry, the second bit of your question was how that relates to data futures. I think it's really important that, in addition to a more expansive conception of ethics, I love where the camera's moving around the room. It's amazing. In addition to a more expansive ethics, we also have, I guess, a much more expansive sense of imagination about what data is, what data systems might look like, how we might draw inspiration for data practices. And I think hopefully you got a sense that the first chapter of the book takes a much wider range of what data practices might look like, from drawing and sketching and sound. So.
Thank you. And I have another one here.
Oh yeah, great.
I was taking a look on your website and I came across a review of your book, emphasizing how data today often functions as an artifact of power and even control, and sometimes becoming a tool of oppression too. And how do you think public data cultures can intervene in a landscape where data sets can be so sensitive?
But data sets can be so sensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I think that we're doing is trying to move away from public and private as one of the most important and taken for granted aspects of data politics. You know what I mean? So I think the very familiar story is what we keep public, what we make public, and what we keep private. I think what we keep private is very important, and I think there are really good. There's really sort of fantastic feminist work on data privacy, for example. There's like really kind of critical legal scholarship on data protection and data privacy, which is really important. There are also really important areas of work around disclosure and transparency and what is made public. But I think the broader point the book is making is that there is more to data than this. This is not. We can think. We can think in a lot more sophisticated ways about not only this question of public and private, but also hello. So I feel like it's funny to be talking about public and private as the camera is moving around the room and focusing on. But yeah, so I guess that would be one part of the response is like complicating how we think about data beyond just this question of public and private, as important as that is.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to make a question? No? Can you move the camera to... Oh, you? Okay, please.
Hi, Professor Gray. I won't be looking at you, but I'll be looking at you right dead in the eyes. The camera is here, and you're here. So, while listening to your talk, I was thinking how public data cultures can be turned toxic also, because, you know, arrangements make meaningful some way. I go by conspiracists. They turn data in some creative arrangements that made meaningful words, although those words are kind of opposite to liberal Occidental values. So it's kind of reconforting listening to your talk, since you know our world is permeated by I'm so anxious, sorry. Our world is permeated by those toxic cultures, and seeing creative and ways to go beyond that, it's so nice. But I think, how can public data cultures prevent this toxicity when the concept on its own kind of allows it? I don't know if I made myself clear.
No, it's a great question. Thank you. I think this relates a little bit to the last comment. I think we can do better than thinking only in terms of public and private. We can also learn from, for example, many marginalized communities who have to negotiate visibility in a way which is very sophisticated. You look at, for example, indigenous data approaches. It's really complicated because there's a lot of emphasis on not placing emphasis, for example, on dysfunction or deprivation, and to have a sense of data which reflects the life and the culture of the groups who the data is supposed to benefit, rather than just certain kind of measures. But I think also, you know, in many ways, queer and marginalized groups have to contend with quite complex issues of representation, visibility, and differentiated understandings of visibility. So it's not just a case of being more visible and more visible being better, or less visible being better. It's kind of like a complex choreography that's very situational. and differentiated. And I think that that's one of the things that I hope to do through the chapters of the book, is kind of bring more context and more situational awareness to data practices and ways of using more of the range. The question on toxicity is very important, because you're absolutely right. It's not the case that these types of tactics and practices are only, for example, progressive. Like, you see data activism on the right and on the far right. So, for example, talking of lists, in America, you see these very prominent cases of lists of professors, lists of people to target, right? Which is terrifying, and there have been attempts between, for example, sorry, it's very distracting, the camera moving around. I like it. It's like, you know, you got to keep noticing. But, you know, between life on the internet and digital culture, which is maybe relevant to your question about toxicity. Not to say that this is straightforward as a way of responding to toxicity. I don't think that, for example, just by investigating and also in the case of, for example, platforms and AI, the corporate structures and the tax havens and the way that money moves around, you know, these are also part of the picture too. You could argue not just how algorithms work, but how the corporate form works as well, which has a longer bubbling history. I don't know if that.
Here I am again. So, first of all, I'm sorry for this crazy automated camera. Someone tried to fix it, but it's not working. So, I hope you're having fun with this at least.
I'm definitely having fun. It's great. Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. I wanted to know if anyone wants to ask any last question, because I want to make a question. No? Well, okay. Well, Jonathan, and massive investment on wind-powered data centers. Like, well, this provokes me in a sense that sometimes I think about ways of public take parts of data, you know, and how the public can participate with this kind of data, and how this local data infrastructure make part of this kind of global platform power. So how do you think your book can help for, like, Brazilians and global South readers to understanding this kind of global power regarding data here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a few parts of the book that speak to this. The third chapter on forms of transnational coordination, for example, countries can be organized. It looks at hashtags, it looks at events, it looks at documents, it looks at how standards and conventions and principles arise through these kinds of coordination mechanisms. It looks at different forms of evaluation. I think evaluation is really interesting and important because evaluating for whom right? Like, how do you test whether an arrangement is working? Who do you ask? And who is visible? And who can be identified to ask to see whether different kinds of arrangements are working? I don't think these things are straightforward, but I do think that, for example, if you look at initiatives like the Global Data Barometer, they've been thinking, I think, quite a bit about like what evaluation from the South might look like when it comes to public interest data sets of different kinds. I think it's a process, but I think they've been making efforts to work with research networks and with civil society groups, which are based in the South, and to rethink evaluation from the South. I also think, it feels important to understand the politics of arrangements which are presented as being global, from UN, United Nations data sets and the kinds of histories in the League of Nations, to transnational economic relationships and the history of the corporate form, which is of course related to things like the East India Company and vehicles which are set to basically facilitate empire, right? So I think there's a lot to untangle historically in terms of standards and arrangements, and there's amazing work in data studies and science technology studies which one can draw on. I do think it seems to me that, you mentioned data centers and wind farms, for example. There are, this is a totally different project, but there are kind of really interesting entanglements between, for example, the rise of technology companies, carbon and climate commitments, things like forest restoration, and how ecological sites are being called upon as carbon sinks and carbon reduction or carbon laundering mechanisms, and how you might see that in terms of also longer histories of colonial terraformation or transforming the land and displacement of people. This is not, I think, a very straightforward answer, but I do feel that like continuing to understand those relationships between the arrangements that we're dealing with in the present and their histories, and I guess taking seriously the question of what there is and what matters and who does what to whom in the arrangements that we use to try and compose better futures. I think, the work on the pluriverse and the uncommons, for example, I find very inspiring in this regard.
Okay. We have a last question. You can come here, please.
Hi, John. Nice to meet you. My name is Alexandre. Media, when we needed to create an account and trade off our data with the platform to access this content, and that you call public data. Do you understand? If we need to trade off our data and create an account and to be inside of these social medias. In the case of the contents of the social media, like this data that we create about the cultures around the world. And this data is in the internet, but we have to create an account and we have to be identified to these platforms, and we have to register ourselves to be to have this access, or to allow our access to this content.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's I feel it does relate a little bit to what I was thinking about in relation to Alan's question, which is what counts as data in relation to social and cultural life. And I guess if you look historically at methods, the politics of methods which are used to understand society and culture. You can think of things like surveys and polls and interviews, right? Like different ways of shaping the way that we know society, and different ways of shaping how the social and cultural becomes knowable through instruments and through processes and devices. I think you can see, there's a lot of literature from around 10 years ago in science and technology studies. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah. You just saw me zooming into myself. Yeah. So like in, STS, right, science and technology studies. So I feel like there's a lot of work looking at the social lives of methods. So looking at, looking at like the way that interviews and polls arise as ways of knowing the social in different ways. The literature around that time, like I guess around 10 or more years ago, was kind of looking at social media data as another kind of method for knowing the social through apps and interfaces and platforms, right? And this is something that you see coming into, for example, spaces like the UN, taking platform data as another source of data for knowing about the social. There's a lot to unpack here, I feel. So what it means to think about the relationship between, for example, official data from public institutions, data gathered from NGOs, and data gathered from platforms, and what kind of ways of knowing the social and knowing culture are possible using these different approaches. All I'll say, sorry, I know this is a very long way of responding to your question. I feel like it's very important to remain, to keep having some critical reflection about methods and some imagination about methods, and not taking for granted which kinds of visions of the social these different kinds of methods produce, and the politics of these methods. Sorry, that's a long answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan. Well, we have to wrap up things here, but I really would like to thank you so much for your time and for commenting your book. I think this is a very important resource for us academics and also students in terms of researching about data, about digital methods, and all this digital environment we are like interacting with. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to come to Brazil, to our university, if you have a chance, maybe next year. So
anytime,
yeah,
I would love that.
So you are very welcome. And if you want to say like last few words to say goodbye to everyone, just feel free to do this.
Yep, please. I really would love to get to know and keep in touch with you and follow your work. So if you go to my website, you can find I'm online in different places. I would really appreciate connecting with you so I can just learn more about your work and learn from the work you're doing, and find more about our shared interests. I wish I was there and we could go around the room and hear from everyone, but because we don't have time for that, if you would find me online, I'd love to hear about what you're doing, and keep in touch. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We were trying to show the audience,
Oh, wow,
but the
what's
camera is not
that?
helping.
Okay, bye. Yeah. Take care. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.